All right, let's dive into a case that's got true crime and paranormal fans buzzing: the Villisca Axe Murder House.
Yeah, it's a classic, a brutal, unsolved murder in a quiet town, tons of suspects, and a whole century of spooky stories.
So it's 1912. We're in Villisca, Iowa. What makes this place and time so perfect for a mystery like this?
Well, Villisca was like small town America, picture perfect. Life moved slow, everyone knew each other, probably didn't even lock their doors.
And then the more family murders happen, totally shattering that sense of safety.
Exactly, like suddenly evil could be hiding anywhere.
And they were coming home from a church event that night. That contrast is just chilling.
Totally. Josiah and Sarah Moore, their four kids, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, they'd been at a children's choir performance at the church.
And they even had two little girls over, the Stillinger sisters, for a sleepover.
Yeah, Lena and Ina, supposed to be a happy night, just a normal sleepover.
Instead, something terrible happened inside that house.
Yeah.
So what about the crime itself? What makes this one so brutal?
Well, it's the pure savagery of the attack that gets to you. Sometime that night, the killer gets in, takes Josiah's own axe,
Oh, wow.
and murders everyone in their sleep. No signs of struggle, no time to even defend themselves.
Except I read that Lena Stillinger's body, they found it in a position that suggests she might have woken up during the attack.
Oh, yeah, that's one of the eeriest parts of the whole thing. Her arm was out like she tried to block the blows. It's just heartbreaking.
They say the crime scene was incredibly bloody. Like, the killer didn't just kill him, it was more than that.
Absolutely. The level of violence, it points to rage or like a personal vendetta.
And Josiah, he was hit the worst.
Oh, yeah, so much force they couldn't even find his eyes. There were marks on the ceiling from the axe swinging.
And then they find cigarette butts in the attic. Like, the killer was up there watching them, waiting for them to sleep.
Right. Lurking in the dark, just biding his time, makes it even creepier.
It wasn't just random, it was planned out.
Exactly. Calculated and deeply disturbing.
Imagine finding that in the morning. Their neighbor, Mary Peckham, she's the one that found them.
Can you imagine the horror? You go over thinking it's just a normal morning, and you walk into that.
It's not just shocking, it changes how you see the world, how you see safety.
And in a town like Villisca, so small, everyone would feel it.
Suddenly, anyone could be the killer.
Right. Fear takes over, suspicion tears the community apart.
And even today, that unsolved crime still hangs over Villisca.
It does.
Let's talk about the investigation. They say it was chaotic, messed up from the start. What happened?
Well, it's 1912, remember? Forensic science was brand new, and a small-town police force, they weren't ready for this.
Right.
Plus, tons of people went to the house wanting to see it all, which contaminated evidence.
Even back then, people were drawn to that kind of thing.
That morbid curiosity, it's like it's in our nature, isn't it?
Yeah, and in this case, it hurt the investigation.
Footprints all over, evidence moved, the crime scene became a spectacle.
But even with that, they did find some suspects, right?
They did.
Let's start with Frank F. Jones. He was a big deal in town, a rich businessman, maybe even had a motive against Josiah Moore.
Right. They had a complicated relationship. Josiah used to work for Jones, then left to start a rival business.
Competition.
Exactly. So there were rumors, bad blood, maybe professional rivalry, even personal dislike.
And some think Jones wanted revenge or to get rid of the competition, and that's why the murders happened.
Yeah, there were even whispers that Jones had threatened Josiah before.
Really?
But even with that, they couldn't directly link Jones to the crime. He had an alibi for that night, no physical evidence at the scene.
So he's a suspect, but they can't prove it.
Right. A dead end.
Then there's William Blackie Mansfield, a much darker character. He was a drifter, violent, maybe even involved in other axe murders.
That's where it starts to feel like a true crime novel.
It does.
Mansfield was known to travel around, and his name came up in a few unsolved axe murders across the Midwest.
Wow.
And the way they were done, families murdered in their sleep with an axe, it's all so similar to Villisca.
For people who don't know, what's modus operandi?
It means the way a criminal does their crime, their signature, Like with Mansfield, it was the axe, families as victims, nighttime attacks.
Oh, I see.
That pattern, plus his lifestyle and his history of violence, made him a prime suspect.
So they might have a serial killer on their hands, someone who fits the Villisca case perfectly.
It seemed like it.
Did they ever prove it was him?
No, unfortunately, even with a lot of investigation, they couldn't place him in Villisca that night.
No witnesses?
There were some who said they saw him around, but nothing solid enough for an arrest. So he stays a possible suspect, but they could never prove it.
So we have a businessman with a grudge, a possible serial killer, and then to make it even weirder, We have Reverend George Kelly,
Oh, yeah, the traveling preacher.
possibly obsessed with the murders. This is where it takes a strange turn.
Reverend Kelly is the most confusing part of it all. He was in Villisca that night, and later he even
He
confessed.
confessed.
He did, but then took it back. It added this whole psychological layer to the case. The investigators couldn't figure him out.
Imagine a preacher confessing to those murders.
It threw everything off. Kelly said he had visions, voices telling him to do it, but his mental state was questionable.
So maybe not a reliable confession.
Exactly, more of a strange side note than the answer.
So 3 very different suspects, all connected, but none of them definitively linked to the crime. No wonder it's still unsolved.
It's a real head-scratcher.
But that's not all, is it? There's another side to this case, something that takes it beyond true crime into the paranormal.
You're right, the murders, the house's history, it all created the perfect setting for people to think it's haunted.
Right.
And over time, the Villisca Axe Murder House has become a place where ghost hunters go, and anyone who wants to experience the unknown.
It makes you wonder if, with all these suspects and no answers, if there's something else going on.
Yeah, something we can't explain.
Like maybe the murders themselves, being so brutal, left something behind in the house.
A mark, like energy or something, that people feel as paranormal activity.
It's definitely what draws people to the house, not just the history, but that chance to touch the unknown.
Exactly.
So for our listeners who love the paranormal, let's get into it. What kind of stuff are we talking about here?
Oh, it's all over the place. Some people say they feel this overwhelming sadness or dread as soon as they walk in.
Like the house has a heavy feeling.
Like a weight, yeah. Others, they report more specific things like voices, children laughing in the halls, shadows moving around.
Ooh, that's creepy.
Yeah, not for the faint of heart. Some even say they've seen full-on ghosts.
Ghosts. Like what?
Well, there's one, they think it's the killer lurking in the attic.
No way.
And others, they describe cold spots, you know, those sudden temperature
Like
drops.
I've heard of those.
Especially in the kids' room and the guest room where the Stillinger sisters were.
Those are classic signs of a haunting, right?
Yeah, a lot of paranormal investigators think so.
What about people getting physically sick or feeling overwhelmed emotionally in the house?
Oh yeah, that's common too. Some get nauseous, dizzy, or feel this pressure, like they can't breathe.
Wow.
And others, they get hit with these waves of emotion, anxiety, sadness, anger, all out of nowhere.
Like the house is trying to tell them something, share the trauma it's seen.
That's a theory, yeah. That these awful events can leave a mark on a place, an echo that some people can pick up on.
And the Villisca house, with everything that happened, it's like a perfect example of that.
A textbook haunting.
It's always fascinated me how places can hold on to energy like that, especially after something terrible.
Like the walls remember it all, the emotions, the violence.
And that's what makes the Villisca house so different. It's not just a crime scene.
Right. It's like a portal to somewhere else, a place where the line between our world and the spirit world gets blurry.
And they let people stay overnight there.
They do. In '94, they restored the house to how it looked in 1912 and opened it up for tours and overnight stays.
So anyone brave enough can sleep there.
Exactly. And experience everything that makes the Villisca house so famous.
I can't imagine trying to sleep there, knowing what happened, feeling all that history around you.
It'd be intense.
I bet you'd have some crazy dreams.
A lot of the guests say they do, yeah. Vivid dreams about the victims or the killer.
Oh, wow.
Some even say they've had encounters, voices whispering their name, things being touched, objects moving.
That's straight out of a horror movie, except it's real. It happened in that house.
And that's the difference. It's not fake scares. It's real, raw, unsettling.
So for our listeners who love true crime and the paranormal, what's the takeaway? Why is this case so interesting even after all this time?
I think it's because it has all the history, the human side, the mystery of who did it, and the possibility of something supernatural.
It plays on our fears, our curiosity about dark things, and our need to understand what we can't explain.
Exactly.
And it just won't go away. 100 years later, people still talk about it, debate the suspects, and go to that house looking for answers or maybe something more. It's like the house itself is alive, holding on to the memories, the feelings, maybe even the spirits of the people who died there.
It's possible.
And until we know who did it, the Villisca house will keep drawing us in, making us face our fears and think about what might be out there.
It's a powerful place.
It's like the house is a pilgrimage for anyone who loves dark history and the paranormal.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It brings in all kinds of people. Skeptics, believers, History buffs, thrill seekers.
All looking for the same thing, what happened that night and what might still be there.
Exactly.
And I think that's what gets us, the unknown. We want answers.
Yeah.
We want to make sense of things.
It's human nature.
But sometimes we just don't get those answers.
And that's where Villisca is different. It doesn't give you easy answers or tie things up neatly.
It just gives you more questions.
Right. It opens a door to theories. Some make sense. Some are totally crazy.
And it makes you think maybe some things will never be solved. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this case, we've gone over the murders, the suspects, the investigation, and all the paranormal stuff. What are your final thoughts? What makes this case so interesting, even after all these years?
For me, it's how it all comes together. The history, the people involved, the unsolved crime, and that hint of something supernatural.
It gets to us on a deep level. Our fears, our interest in the dark side of things, our need to understand what's beyond us.
Yeah.
And it just won't go away. Over 100 years later, people are still talking about it, still trying to figure it out, still going to that house.
Still searching.
Here's something I've been thinking about, the violence of the murders and all the paranormal reports.
Yeah.
Could it be that the intensity of it all, the terror, left a mark on the house? A kind of scar that we can still feel today?
That's a really interesting thought, the connection between the two.
Maybe that's what the Villisca House is all about. A reminder that some wounds never heal, some stories never end, and some mysteries will always be with us.
Even after the lights go out.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Villisca Axe Murder House. We hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
And if you're ever in Iowa, maybe you'll be brave enough to visit the house yourself.
Just be careful out there.
Okay, until next time.